Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining the alternate and historical fiction track and our Who is the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, a fan panel. We have some fantastic panelists for y'all this evening, so we are super excited. But I want to make sure to introduce our moderator, Allison Chapin. Thank you so much for joining us, and everyone enjoy the panel.
I'm so glad that we're getting to do this panel on Mrs. Maisel. I adore this show. It is the one show in my household no one else but me watches, which is kind of nice. So I get to do that all by myself. So first off, I'd like for all the other panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Zan, if you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Hi, my name's Eternal Zan, which is just my convention nickname because I'm a DragonCon Eternal member and a longtime attendee. And I also volunteer helping with setup. I look forward to moving and unpacking many boxes this year.
I'm Jenna. I have been a Mrs. Maisel fan since season 1, and I'm looking very forward to the show coming back. I have been going to DragonCon. I think this is my 10th year. So I'm super excited to be back, and especially in a capacity where I can talk about my favorite shows. So.
Hi, my name is Mike Faber. I am the host of the Earth Station 1 podcast, and also I run the ESO Network, which is a geeky podcast network filled with different shows about all different kinds of topics, including Mrs. Maisel, which we've talked about in the past on one of our shows. And I'm excited for this. It's about time Mrs. Maisel has made it to the big leagues of DragonCon, and it's going to be a ton of fun to talk about this tonight. I've been watching Mrs. Maisel also since the first season, and each season it just gets better and better and grows, and you're seeing the growth of the characters, and it's going to be a ton of fun tonight. So, Allison, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad that y'all are here and we're getting to talk about this show. First off, I want everybody to just tell me what you love most about the show. For me, it's 3 W's. I love the writing, the women, and most importantly, the wardrobe on this show. The costuming is amazing. So, Zan, if you would like to start off and tell us what your favorite thing about the show is, let's start with you.
Well, I have a different experience than some of our other panelists. I've heard about this show for a long time, but I also know that sometimes first season shows get canceled, so I didn't watch it right away. I actually just binged it for the first time a few months ago and then again recently because I was like, oh, it has 3 seasons now. And I knew it was on a streaming service, so I thought, oh, it could have just been 10 episodes, cliffhanger, canceled, and I didn't want to go through that again. So I didn't have the experience of like waiting and waiting and waiting in the anticipation. For me, it's all a relatively recent binge. And for me, from the first episode, and this definitely carried on to future episodes, it was kind of the feeling of family and the tone, like the rhythm of how they speak and kind of the natural patter, and they're all talking at the same time and interrupting. And it just really felt like a family. And to me, that's kind of really what drew me in and kept me watching the future episodes.
Oh, absolutely. And what you were talking about there with the whole family kind of dynamic, that is really just the writing of Amy Sherman Palladino. Like when you start with, if you started and you watch Gilmore Girls, you have this back and forth kind of banter, and it carries over throughout her series, and it's wonderful to see. I think though that what got me started is because I'm a sucker for a very strong female character, and that's exactly what Midge Maisel is. She's a very strong character, and you can see her grow throughout the series.
That's a good way to put it. You see the growth, and it's just truly amazing. For me, what drew me to the series is the history of it. The thought of, learning about a female comedian slash, housewife, well, former housewife, and basically, at the era of the late 1950s, now early 60s, it's just outstanding. And to, to figure out, to see that era, the costumes, the history that was around it, the characters around it, the family, and the culture. For me, it was all about the culture. She was a upper West Side Jew who pretty much was a princess who had everything handed to her. You saw that in the first episode, even to the point where she didn't want her husband to see her without makeup and her hair done and everything. It was so typical of that era of the late 1950s. And it was amazing to see. And, then for her to basically take over for her ex being a comedian was just perfect. And I'm sure we're going to talk about all the family members and the dynamics and everything. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about this tonight.
Well, great. As a side comment, my grandmother used to vacuum her house in heels and pearls. I will never forget that. But 1950s, you always wanted to look perfect. You did.
My grandmother's house, she had the plastic runners so we wouldn't ruin the carpet. The couches were covered in the plastic. So, and there was, so the grandkids wouldn't spill anything on. It was, I grew up with that. I grew up in those type of households. So yeah, I know it exactly.
I honestly thought that was just like something on TV. I didn't
No.
know women
too.
actually like really did
No,
that in
this
real
was all-
life. I thought
This
that
is
was
all
some,
real, Zan. That's the great thing about
I
it.
thought that was like male TV executives going, well,
Yeah.
she's vacuuming, she should be wearing a dress and pearls. Like, I mean, it seems like it would be a TV executive thing, doesn't it? I didn't know it was real until like literally just now.
Everything you're seeing on this show is legit, including, the women were homemakers, but they still had somebody to cook the meals for them. They had, that was my grandparents. This was, we it didn't seem that far off from me. I knew exactly from this. Having one bedroom that was the wardrobe because the closets in the house were not big enough for the clothes. Going up to taking the summers off and going up to the Catskills. That's all legit. I could tell you guys stories about this for hours. It was just amazing, and it hit home so many different ways over the seasons, and it just keeps on coming. And that's what's wonderful about this show. It's based all on reality of not maybe the families were real, but what was going on at the time. So it was pretty awesome.
Well, I wanted to start our conversation on the first episode, where you see this family and you think of a classic upper class Jewish family, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, her husband leaves her, and you're like, what just happened? So I wanted to talk about how it affected Joel and how it affected Midge, because I think both of them had a very different experience. And I don't think either one, well, Midge didn't expect it at all, but Joel, I don't think got out of it what he thought he was going to get out of leaving his wife. So who would like to start talking about the kind of the breakup and where you think that came from? And was it a midlife crisis, or what exactly do you think was going on there?
With that particular episode, we see Midge trying to be the perfect housewife there at the beginning, as we said, wouldn't even let Joel see her without her makeup or her hair done. When Joel left Midge, I think it was mostly because where he had failed at his comedy routine and he didn't want to be that failure for her. And that was the catalyst, though, that really starts off Midge's journey and her self-exploration. But with Joel leaving, I don't think we could have had it any other way to have this start off to Midge's comedy career. Something had to happen there.
It was really interesting too, because when Joel left her, and first thing out of her parents' mouth, what did you do wrong? It wasn't like, oh, you poor soul. Nowadays it would be, everyone coming to the woman's support. But no, she did something. What did you do wrong? Were you not a good enough housewife? Did you not, you had given him 2 children. Why didn't you give him more? That type of thing. And it was interesting. And I was so happy it didn't turn out the way Joel was hoping it would, because he basically wanted his cake and eat it too, because he was already sleeping with his, the secretary, and he was having an affair, and it was just like he basically was given everything. He was given the apartment by his parents, and he was given all these different things, and he was spoiled. Both of them were, and and that was really interesting, for them to see. They both got hit with reality, that to get, when they were apart, they both had to reestablish who they were. And I think Midge went off in a direction she never expected to go, and everything with with the comedy, even though she was writing the jokes and he wasn't even coming up with original stuff. He was copying Bob Newhart, of all things. So it was just really interesting to see.
Yeah, I feel like the surprising part isn't that there was, a breakup in a show with if you start off a show with a happily married couple, where are you going to go? So I feel like the breakup itself wasn't really surprising. I think what made it a different storyline than a lot of other TV shows is that they don't end up getting back together. That it's not, that it's not the kind of story where she, a lot of stories are centered around the couple being happy or breaking up and then getting back together, and they were always destined to be together. And I don't get the sense, I mean, I could be wrong, I know season 4 is coming out, but I don't get the sense that this is that kind of show. I think it's about following members of a family when they don't stay together.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing what happens in season 4, and if for some reason Midge and Joel ever did get back together, they're not the same people, so it would not be the relationship at all anymore. So it would definitely be a new thing.
It would be interesting too, because if you remember, though, throughout the series, Midge always runs back to Joel. When she was with, she was got proposed to by Zachary Levi's character, and he was amazing. He was, he was the doctor, so it was pretty awesome that she had that given to her, and he was even accepting of her doing the comedy and everything. But the night before she decided to go out on tour, who did she run back to? Joel. She ended up sleeping with Joel again. And it wasn't the first time, so it's just interesting how they keep on running back to each other. Do I think they'll end up together? No. And everything. But I think that they're to each other's anchor points in some points. And you can't use the excuse, oh, they have kids together or anything. That doesn't fly. I have a kid with my ex, and I don't keep running back to her, for no reason.
I feel like if they do end up back together, the dynamics will be reversed, because she's now more successful and independent than he is.
True, in a different way, but he's also going by his dream now and starting the nightclub also. And
right.
Sorry, we're jumping around on the show, but he's starting the nightclub, and oh my God, that was such a great scene, having the Chinese gambling hall underneath. That was just classic. But it was awesome, and I'd love to see him succeed at that. And I hope they're both successful. But I think this last season, she had to learn some very painful truths about what you can say in your act and about who and what too. But that's part of the growing pains of being a comedian and learning in the field.
Yep. I also enjoyed his opening night, and they had the electricity problem that they always have in that because of the gambling in the basement. and she jumps up on stage to save him. And if they didn't have that bond and friendship, I don't think she would have come to his rescue, which was kind of nice to see.
And it's neat too because the bond has grown over the 3 seasons. And, they didn't really want to have anything to do with each other for the first, season and a half. And that's what makes the show special. Because I think it was when they were when he came up to the summer cottage thing, up at the colony. And, I think that showed a lot, and they actually showed that they could be friends again, not just, exes who hate each other.
Okay, well, let's change topics now and move to when Midge started on stage in the little bitty cafe. I forget the name of the place. I don't know why. But she and Susie, who both of them really didn't know what they were doing. And both of them are trying to make it, both women doing something new. Susie, who tries to be her manager. I'd love to talk a little more about how being new benefited them and how it hurt them. Because in some ways, being new, I think, was a benefit to them. Anybody want to talk about that?
Sure. It was neat because, they both were, neither of them had experience. Susie had no idea how to be a manager, and Midge had no idea how to be a comedian. She just knew funny stories and everything. But they worked off of each other, and then they were able to grow. And, they were like trying to figure out what it was like to try to book clubs and try to then, work with the club owners and try to get in to a slot for Midge to get into to be able to perform. And was the fantastic thing about it, the growth between them, and how, you then learned that, each one has their weaknesses, but together they're stronger. And that's what was the best thing about it.
Yeah, I can see the benefit of, being new. You'd be able to go back and forth to like these different clubs. As we see them in the beginning, they are going and they're just audience members in these clubs. So they're able to see these other comedians and see what works, see what doesn't. And, even becoming patrons at, what is the restaurant? I cannot remember the name of it. To be able to speak with these other managers to see what works for their clients and these other comedians, that is very beneficial of being a new kid in this already established crowd, because you're able to get like the tips and the tricks from all these other individuals. The drawback, you were new. These clubs and these cafes are going to go for the more well-known names. And you're going to end up, if you're newer, you're going to end up with the really ratty time slots where, there may be nobody in the audience. So how can you learn and grow to what really works, unless you have a better times where you have an audience who can really let you know by their laughter, of course, what's working for you.
Yeah, I enjoyed the scenes. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it. I want to say Stars Deli, or is anybody?
The Stage Deli.
Stage Deli. Okay, yeah.
Rest in peace, Stage Deli.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed the scenes there where it's, they just walk in and it's all business, and like you said, her getting advice from people. But I feel like, in like your typical sitcom, they're all hanging out at the coffee shop or something like that. And I felt like the Stage Deli was kind of the central perk of this show.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. It was just interesting because, the Stage Deli was the main focal point where they met to make their deals and everything like that, and made me so miss Real Deli. But that's, a whole nother story for another episode. But it's the cool thing about it is, especially once she met Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was her mentor, because at the time, Lenny Bruce was a fringe comedian who, was, on the brink of stardom and becoming a name, but he always got himself into trouble because a lot of times he cursed or he told stories against politicians and items like that at the time. And so he kept on getting himself arrested and such. And I think Midge, said, hey, this is a man doing this. Let's see what happens if a woman tries this. The very first time she performed, she was drunk off her butt and she flashed the audience, do these look like a breasts of a woman who had 2 children? And it was just awesome because, you never knew what was going to come out of her mouth. And as Mrs. Maisel, she, as her identity, she was able to talk about family members, talk about, all this different things, and knowing that none of her family would ever hear this until finally happened.
Let's talk a little more about Lenny Bruce and Midge's relationship. I know that was a huge help for her in some ways and taught her a lot, but also it was an interesting relationship that didn't, as many of her love relationships, didn't end up moving forward. But how do you think he helped her and made sure that she actually made it? Because I think without him, she might not have gotten as far as she has.
I thought it was interesting that reporters, like, their first question was, are they dating? Like that came out right away. So I think there were a lot of points in the show where she was kind of like, hey, I'm just a comic. And then she's not being treated as just a comic by the press, that, that they were kind of treating her as a novelty, which I'm sure in that time and place, they weren't used to female comics. But I liked that they didn't ignore that aspect, that, I was like, oh yeah, that's probably what would have happened. I'm sure that still happens today, that women get questions like that men don't get. So I thought that was really interesting. And I also like that they reference specific times and places, like when they reference a certain building that's an institution now, they're like, oh, it's still under construction, and so I like that there are those kind of touch points in the show that make it seem like that it really happened and that she's not a fictional character, by bringing in those real things. So I appreciated that because, the first time it happened, I found it a little bit jarring because it's such a stylized world with, like you said, with the hair and the makeup and such the defined sense of place. But really quickly, I saw how bringing in elements of the real world just enhanced the show and didn't detract from it at all, at least not for me.
For me, it was interesting because, like Zan said, when they introduced Midge and basically, into the public, the first questions, oh, are you Lenny Bruce's girlfriend? That was like, that's the way the media worked at the time. That was the total 50. Oh, a female comedian working on her own? No, it's always the female was the sidekick. It was like Burns and Allen, or you look at, stuff like, all these other female comedians who started with somebody. It was rare to see a female stand up on her own and to do blue material, do more, just not being the silly ditzy housewife or something.
Can you talk about what blue material is?
Blue material pretty much is more adult material. Cursing, because they arrested them for just saying the S word or the F word or BS on stage, or talking about having sex or something at the time. That was considered blue material, and that was unheard of in the late 1950s, especially from a woman. It was okay for the guys to talk about it, but you never heard about it from the women. And if you notice, during her act over the 3 seasons, she got away from a lot of that, like the more raunchy stuff. She talked more about her life experiences, talking about things she's going in her everyday life, more like, and it was got cleaner and cleaner, but and it was very interesting to see, especially like in the final episode when she played the Apollo, and she thought she was nervous and everything because she was playing against, she was a white Jewish girl from the Upper West Side who was now playing up in Harlem at the Apollo in front of an African American audience. And it was, how does she relate to these people? She was literally the only white act on that that night, and it was just, and she went too far because she burnt bridges by revealing sexualities of people and stuff. And it was just interesting to see because her relationships changed over the 3 seasons with some of the other comedians that she associated with too, which was really neat. And that's as she grew and became more of a name, she was growing past a lot of these people, which was really interesting too.
I'd like to follow up a little bit on that. How you were saying at the towards the beginning, she kind of had like this this more raunchy kind of act. I think that, in my opinion, it was more of kind of like imposter syndrome coming from her, because she's up here on stage where it's mostly men doing these comedy acts. So she's trying to emulate them as much as she can to try to get the same reactions from the audience. And of course, as she grows in her comedy, she realizes, I don't have to be this kind of individual. I can do my own thing and still be successful at it. And I think that it really works, especially throughout the progression of the show, that we see her become this stronger character, up to her act at the Apollo. I adored that entire set that she did. And of course, it's a drastic difference from what she did that first night at the Gaslight.
Oh, exactly. And that's exactly you hit it perfectly, because it's a good contrast. And how she had to be up there with the men, and she had to, try to almost overdo them because she was a female and she was not overcompensating, but it was going, she had to prove herself, and she made a couple enemies even along the way because of that.
Well, let's move on from the person that helped her to her biggest rival. Let's talk a little bit about Sophie Lennon, who went the other direction. She did not go the ladylike way at all. She, instead of playing with the boys, went and made her own character. So who would like to talk a little bit more about that rivalry? Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can start. I absolutely adore Jane Lynch as an actress. She's one of my all-time favorites. And to see her portray this character who has such a duality. You see Sophie on stage. She's this big, boisterous lady. Brooklyn, I think. Is it Brooklyn? From New York. She's adopted this attitude. She's like, I'm this big bad person. And then you literally see the opposite of her as Sophie, the millionaire who has been able to get the accolades from her audiences. She's prim and proper, and I'm like, that
she's giving away mink coats. Yeah. It's awesome. Which is just wonderful.
Such a shock.
Yeah, her character was very, actually it was more like, it was more country, like a country girl. And, hey, growing up on the farm, and it was like the hayseed and everything. And then going in her real life, like you said, was all this prim and proper with the, the full, butler, the cook, all the whole staff, and it was just like night and day. And Midge actually blew the cover on it, and during one of her acts, and it actually was foreshadowing what she ended up doing. It also at the end of the third season, blowing someone's cover, and it was just really interesting to see. And then when, you know, basically she tried stealing Susie from under Midge, and the total rival thing, and it was just awesome to see that dynamic. And then Susie working with her, trying to for her Broadway debut, and you felt for Sophie because oh, she's going to be working into this play and become serious, that she's not just this country bumpkin that's portrayed out, and that she's a serious actress, and she couldn't handle the pressure of it. And she totally ruined the opening night of the show because of it, because of her insecurities, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of saw. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, can we even consider that an opening night? I think it was a one night only show for that play.
Well, now it was, yeah, because it was such a disaster. There's been Broadway plays with big budgets, big productions and everything, but they got so slammed by the critics and everything, they closed after a day or two, literally. And it's just, and to this day that still happens. Well, not for the last year, but you know what I mean.
Do you feel like if there had been a second night, could she have redeemed herself with her performance? Because I think they made it clear that in the private performance, she was amazing.
I don't think she had it in her, to be out in public and to be taken seriously. She always had to be going for the laugh in public, where, and that's where her nerves got the better of her, because she was great doing it. People were saying, this is what we want from Sophie. This is exactly the type of performance we wanted. And literally she could not do it in front of, because she's always been used to playing for a laugh and hearing, and she thought she was failing because she wasn't hearing laughing or anything from the audience, which you don't at a Broadway play or during, a performance. And that got on her, and that, like, something in her head snapped, and she said, I've got to, bring the house down. I got to focus on the laughter again and everything. And that was horrible. It was such a disaster. And then her trying to blame Susie for it, where it was completely her fault.
Yeah, like when Jen was saying about, Jen, I think you made an excellent point about the duality of her on-screen persona and her personal life, and even who she was at home seemed to be kind of somewhat of a performance to me. Like when nobody's around, is that still who she is? It still seemed like she was doing her best to impress Midge as her guest when she came over. And the other character that we really got to see duality was her mom. When her mom went home to Oklahoma with her family, you were like, the whole series, I thought she was just born and raised in New York. And then you saw her going home to her family in Oklahoma, and you were like, oh, there's this whole other side of her too. So I really like that we've gotten to see some backstories.
Yeah.
I think we barely scratched the surface on the mom. I think there's so much going on there. You always assumed that the money came from Abe's side of the family, but no, it was her side. And she was the little girl who went off with the college professor, and it was really interesting to see that they came from a lot of oil money, and it was just really, really neat to see that what happened. And I think there's going to be a lot more with that this season.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say it wasn't until I was like an adult, like out of high school, that I even learned what the term pin money meant. Like I remember at one point learning that in my grandmother's lifetime, there was a time when she didn't have her own checking account because they didn't used to let women have their own bank account. They only got their own bank account when they were married. And, then it was a joint account with their husband. So how money is passed along, and that for those that don't know, pin money is, what it seemed like on the show. It was money that the men gave to the women in their family, because it wasn't expected that women worked. It was expected that they married and lived off their husband's money. So yeah, for them to show that this is how things used to be, I think reading about it in a textbook, or learning about it on a history podcast or the History Channel, it's interesting to actually see how these things play out on a fictionalized drama. It somehow makes it seem more real when I see it in a fictionalized drama than when I read about it in a book.
No, it was interesting when they had that, the scenes with her family, because they were like, oh, this is just little sister talking. She didn't have, pretty much any say in the family, even though, she wanted to try to gain control and, try to put a foot down. And they just, like, literally, even the little kid had more power than she did in the board meetings. And it was kind of like eye-opening with that. It was just amazing to see.
Yeah, I mean, somewhat you could understand, like, doesn't live there. She clearly hasn't lived there in decades, but still, like she said, she was a senior member of the family. So it was clear that, maybe you could understand when she was younger, she hadn't earned the seat. But at that point, she's a senior member of the family. If they weren't going to give it to her then, it was obviously never going to happen.
Exactly. And I think that entire arc made me so unbelievably angry, because
It was supposed
Rose
to. It was supposed to.
Yeah, and it was, the thing that gets me though is that all the men in this family and on this board, they're saying that no, she can't do it because she's a woman, and yet their entire company was their grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no. No. I was so mad, and I applauded when she walked out of that house.
It was good to see, but it's interesting because Rose went through quite a few different things during this, during the 3 seasons. When she left, Abe and went to Paris, and that was an amazing storyline, and it was awesome. You actually thought about it, and like, she's not coming back. She's actually left him, and it would be kind of ironic, the father and the daughter being stuck without the mother, and she's just gone. And
yeah, Tony Shalhoub and Kevin Pollak. I mean, the whole cast, they're all stars. They have so much experience on that show of people that we've seen in movie after movie and TV show after TV show, that just the entire cast, the way they support each other and how they can bounce lines off each other. I watched Gilmore Girls too, and this reminded me of that, and West Wing, just like the seamless patter between the characters. It just, I mean, as actors, they must have rehearsed, but it just seems like they just walked onto set and the scene just naturally happened. It's just, they're that good at their jobs that it doesn't seem like it at all, that it's scripted. It just sounds that, the dialogue and the writing is just so amazing.
no, and that's what's been great about it is, the casts, literally, Kevin Pollak and Tony Shalhoub, and these are big names, and they play awesome characters, and that's just the wonderful thing about it. And they're so human, and that's what even makes it more special.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Rose going to Paris. We talked about that a little bit, but when she goes, the whole family breaks down because that's family was all pinned on the mother. And when Abe goes over and stays in Paris with her, how do you think that actually affected their relationship long term? Do you think it's going to continue to affect their relationship, or do you think they're going to go back to the way they were when they really get back to the river?
Well, we probably all have this experience when we take off work and school to go to DragonCon. I don't know about anybody else on the panel, but I haven't had time off in over a year. And I know a lot of people, our work schedules have radically changed in the last year. It seems like we've all gone to extremes. You're either working not enough or way too many hours. And I feel like if you're on the spectrum of working a lot of hours, people can't miss you until you're gone. Like sometimes it's just good to go, I'm going to Dragon Con, bye, don't call me. Like, which I literally tell people, like, don't call me, I won't pick up the phone, I'm at Dragon Con, take care of it yourself, bye. I mean, I say it nicely, but that's what I'm saying. And, I feel like with their relationship, he can't take her for granted anymore. You don't know what you've got until you've lost it. And he learned that very hard lesson.
Very true. And it was interesting too, because it felt like, you know, they both realized what was missing from their marriage, and that he had been taking her for granted, and that she was more part of his life than he ever expected, and that he needed her. But it also showed to both of them what was missing from their lives. He realized, I was a radical once, I was this revolutionary, and he goes off the deep end from that point, with trying to get the job at Bell South or whatever, AT&T, whatever it was at the time, and then him being leaving the university, and the whole going down, and then the son having to let his dad know that because of Midge that he didn't get the job with with the government or with Bell Labs. And it was just awesome, that it, and then, and how he then wanted to make the revolutionary newspaper and was trying to work with the beatniks, and, and they wanted, and he was like, no, that's not how you do it. And it was just awesome.
And again, there goes the duality. All the entire series could be like the duality of all the characters, because you have Abe, who was a college professor, but yet he was a radical. And even when they're in France, they're talking about different Marxist leaders with his friends in the cafe, and it's they've all just got the duality there. I think their time in Paris is going to bring them closer together, maybe to the point like where they were when they were newlyweds, possibly even closer, because Abe has now seen what it's like to live without Rose, and then Rose is being able to establish some dominance. She's like, no, I have to be happy in this relationship as well. So I think that the time away will be beneficial to both of them.
It was interesting too, because she realized, I don't need him. I can go and do my thing. I can go to my cafes and get my, my cappuccinos, and, and go look at art museums, and, live this way. I don't need, him in my life. And then he comes crawling back to her, and it's like, okay, but let's try doing this way, be more bohemian. And I think it was awesome.
Yeah, I feel like, you have to, if you want to establish new patterns and try new things, you have to break your old habits. And that can be really hard. Sometimes you don't realize you're kind of in such a rut until you stop doing what you were doing and give yourself the time and space to try something new.
Literally spicing up the marriage there.
I do like what Jen said about the duality of all the characters. I feel all of them have the face that people expect them to have in society, and then the face of what they really want. And you see them in the show get to try out both in a lot of different characters, which is very nice to see. Also, part of my favorite scenes in the show have been Rose and Abe living with Joel's parents in Queens.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Just the thought of getting up that early in the morning. I am a night person. That is a nightmare. When they were like waking up at 5 a.m. It's like, that's a punishment. That's awful. Like, if you're used to it, that's one thing, but 5 in the morning, that's crazy.
I'm just going to bed at 5 in the morning.
But yeah, the whole laundry day scene, like waking them up because it's laundry. Like, what? No, that's just, yeah. I feel like they weren't trying to make them uncomfortable. They were just living their lives. I didn't ever get the impression they were trying to make them uncomfortable to push them out of their home. I never thought that. I just thought that, you know, they have their routines too, and hey, it's laundry day.
Yeah, Moish and Shirley, you know, we see from the very beginning they have big personalities and they don't mesh with Abe and Rose very well at all. So to see them cohabitating in one home, it was, you know, it kind of reminded me a lot of my own family in several ways, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I've experienced this before. So
Well, it's interesting because you could tell, you know, the different lifestyles that they came from, and it also fit because, you know, even with Joel and with Midge, you know, they're, you know, how they melded together, they were the best of what their parents were, but the parents were the extremes on either side, and them then ending up living together was like total the odd couple, which was just awesome to see.
That was a lot of fun to watch. So we were talking earlier about PIN accounts and women not being able to have bank accounts. I think I love the scene where Midge goes to try to buy back her apartment that she had with Joel, that Joel's dad originally bought from her. And she's telling him how she can come up with the money to pay for it. And that was very telling of the the time and how women were being treated. She was like, I'm making my own money, but I can't buy things. So that was very interesting. I also loved watching how they made the dress business such an integral part of so many parts of the story, where you got to see the couple that was making the business and then the son trying to make the business better. I wanted to talk a little bit about Joel trying to help his father and how you felt about that.
That was fun because that was real life for me. Because that my grandfather worked in the, basically, how do I want to say this? My grandfather worked in the housewares business. He had his own store, but he also had a factory also. And my dad tried coming into his business and modernizing him. You know, they didn't have keep actual books at the time. They had, you know, they literally kept envelopes of cash sitting around the office, and they had, oh, we have to pay this person this time. They just went into one of the drawers, did the dollars and stuff, and literally then put it into the calculator, and it was one of those old fashioned calculators where you put it in and did the arm and the paper came out and everything. And it was amazing to see this because it was so real. And that's how businesses ran at the time, especially smaller, not these huge corporations, but the mom and pop type companies. Yeah, they had a lot of people working for them. Oh, that's so and so. His sister's working here, but we're paying her under the table. Or oh, that's so and so. We're letting her stay here for a couple nights, because her husband is on the drink or whatever. But you had stuff like that, and that was when they were doing that, and then Joel coming in and trying to modernize it, and the father like, what? Accountants? Why do I want accountants involved in this? And a checking account? I don't want to talk to a banker, because also you have to realize a lot of those people also lived through the Depression, and everything that people had invested in was lost, because of the bankers and the accountants and everything. That's why they did a lot of the things on their own. And that was totally what I saw from that.
Yeah, but hiding money in your in-laws' house, yeah, that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I adore
do you still have that? I don't know. Do you still have that shoebox in your bedroom floor? It's like, yeah, oh, I think we have 20,000 in there, or something like that.
Yeah, for me, both sides of my family, like a lot of Americans, most of our families came from another country, and both sides of my family have been in America for over 100 years. So there are family stories from the Depression that I have been told that have come down the generations. None of them involve shoeboxes, but shoeboxes of money. I never opened a closet and found $20,000. That'd be great if I had. But to see, from the personal experience, my dad's retired now, but he ran his own business for many years, and he had to, he lived through the time period where he had to learn about computers because he did not grow up with them. Like personal computers did not exist when he was a child or a young adult or starting off in the business world. So that's one of the things I helped him do was, get things, help him, teach him how to use a computer and how to use programs on a computer and how to send email. Like everything my dad knows about computers, I taught him. So I feel like there's, that's in a lot of families, I'm sure, just a generational experience. The older generation teaches the younger generation, and at a certain point, that process also naturally reverses, and the younger generation brings in new ideas to help the family business.
No, that's a great way to put it, Zan, because a lot of families were that way. And this was the late 1950s going into the 60s was a very transitional period for businesses, for a lot of America at that time. It was going from the more traditional, suit and ties everywhere into more of a open society too. And, that was the same way with businesses and everything. And you had kids coming up because a lot of times these parents literally started the companies with their parents, and they went from, if they finished school, they went right into the business. They didn't go to college and stuff. Then, you had Joel and Midge who were college graduates, and, they were educated and coming in, hey, Pa, why are you doing it this way? I know you've been doing it this way for the last 30 years, but let's try it this way. And, no, that's going to be too complicated. That's not going to, and that's what you ran into a lot and everything, because you had more education, you had better business ways of doing things. It was really interesting to see. And I love poor Abe, was going with his business. I can't give this business to you. I want you to go out and go find your dreams. This is my dream. Your dream isn't working at the garment factory.
Here's the bar mitzvah money I stole from you.
Exactly. You would not see a lot of parents do that. They would expect the kid to come work for them, type thing. It was almost a given.
Well, I wanted to go back to Midge and her arc as a comedian, and her finally getting her tour, opening for Shy Baldwin. And I wanted everybody to give like their favorite memory of that tour, because there are lots of amazing things that happened on the tour. But everybody wants to give whatever your favorite thing was. I actually really loved watching the girls that they had on stage that were in almost nothing to perform for the boys, which were always so funny. And then she would come up in a dress afterwards that was all prim and proper with her pearls. I always found that really kind of fun to see. So Jen, you want to start with your favorite memory from the tour?
Okay, my favorite memory from the tour is from the very first time that she's doing anything, and it's the USO when they're doing that little thing. And it's such to me, it's kind of a pivotal one. But for a lot of people, especially those of different religions who don't celebrate Christmas, not knowing the words to White Christmas. And I adored that. I'm like, that's perfect.
Especially, with the Jewish community at the time. Now it's become more integrated and such, especially in schools. Back then, it wasn't. A lot of the Jewish kids went to the Jewish schools. Yeah. A lot, and the public schools were more for everyday people and such. But if you had any kind of money, you didn't go to public school. Yep. You went either to Catholic school, or you went to Hebrew school, or even the Jewish day schools And, my wife went to a Jewish day school, so I completely, I know all of, what they experienced. And, they didn't, she says the only way I ever learned Christmas carols or anything was because Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and TV and, all those, and the Peanuts. But they weren't taught that in school, and that's probably what Midge was going through.
Yep.
And everything.
Yeah, I could relate to that. I did not see the movie It's a Wonderful Life until I was an adult. Because I'm Jewish and my dad isn't, but my mom is, but I was raised Jewish. And so, there were certain things that people were like, didn't you watch it every Christmas? And I was like, no, we sang Hanukkah songs and lit the menorah next to the Christmas tree, like an American family. Like there was like Christmas because of my dad, but it wasn't religious. And then there was Hanukkah because of my mom, and it was like all kind of mixed up together because we were kids, and they were just like, at a certain age it's really more about the presents. So it was kind of that age. So I could relate to that because there were things that I learned eventually, but I wasn't taught them the same way everybody else was, maybe at the same age. So for me, my favorite scene was the backstage scene where Midge was like, I'm making a brisket, and she's just cooking and kind of for the whole crew, and kind of going back to like a family atmosphere. She's treating everybody like family because when you're on the road, you are family. And I kind of liked how, she was just being who she naturally was and fitting in that way. She wasn't trying to fit in by pretending to be somebody or something she wasn't. She was fitting in by being exactly herself and sharing her culture and her background with everybody else. And so that's the part of the tour that I really enjoyed because it was about the family and the community.
I could totally see that. And that scene was really, really moving for me. But I just loved the whole atmosphere when they were in Miami. There was just something about being down there. And, in that era, and I'm also a huge James Bond fan, and they were at the Fontainebleau. And if you ever saw the movie Goldfinger, the beginning of that movie is also shot there. So I had the James Bond feel, but it was awesome to see, and how the whole family came down with her to be at the hotel, and it was really interesting. But also at the same time, they couldn't, Shy couldn't stay at the Fontainebleau because of segregation, and that was a real eye opener. And it's like, wow, I'm glad they went there with the series and everything. They didn't shy away from that. No pun intended.
Yeah, I'd heard stories about what it was like for Sammy Davis Jr. So that he couldn't stay, at least in the beginning, with the people he was on tour with either. So I enjoyed seeing that they acknowledged the reality of the time that they were living in, and that they did not fictionalize that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And, they touched on a lot of, that's one great thing I loved about the show, is they had no problem touching on, very tender subjects, and, and it was cool. And that's one of the things I love about the show.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Susie.
You could have a whole panel about Susie.
I know we could have a whole panel about
Entire panel.
Susie is amazing. I wanted to talk a little bit about the differential between, we've talked about this Midge coming from this upper class Jewish family, and then we've got Susie, who lives in an apartment that you can barely have two people in at the same time. And Midge is all concerned about her measurements because Susie finds her book that she keeps the measurements of her body every single day, which is kind of crazy, but it was normal to do that. And I just love the dichotomy of the two completely different women that get along so great. But if everybody wants to tell me their favorite thing about Susie, let's start with that first. What do you love about Susie?
I love that Susie is in love with Midge. That, basically she would go to war for Midge. And when I say love, I don't mean in love, but, you know, the characters, she saw the raw talent in Midge. She pushed Midge to continue doing the comedy, and where Susie had no experience at all about this. She didn't know how to deal with these agents. She didn't know how to, book a comedian in a club. She had no clue, and she had to learn, and she kept on stepping on people so the wrong way. And then when they finally, start making it, they're successful. Susie discovers gambling and basically goes through and loses everything that Midge earned. And I think it was a stroke of genius and her coming to terms with herself that she basically got Joel involved to handle the finances. I think that was genius. And it showed the growth on Susie's part.
Oh, absolutely. And as you said, the growth on Susie's part, we see this growth of her character from the very beginning. At the beginning, she's working at the Gaslight. It seems like she's comfortable in her position. And then when she sees Midge come through doing her impromptu little performance, and she's like, you know what, you can make this big. But I have been in this business of watching these people up on stage, but I can help make you big. So to see Susie's drive go from someone who was very complacent in her place in life to this dynamic character who will do whatever she can to help her clients succeed. I mean, we see it with Midge, of course, but we even see it with Sophie somewhat, because Sophie comes to Susie because of how she went to bat for Midge, especially at that telethon. She's like, you know what, you're gonna leave my girl alone, and she's really going to help her strive for greatness. And in doing that, Susie is becoming great herself, and just that entire progression there is wonderful.
Oh, that whole telethon scene was just amazing. When she went into the control room, what are you doing in here? You're not going to cut my girl.
And then at the end, they walk out, they're friends. It's the best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to need to ask everybody to do something here. I don't want to jinx it, knock on wood, but we all know that series don't last forever. So when this series ends, raise your hand. And even if you're watching this on streaming, I need you to raise your hand if you need a spin-off series called Susie Meyerson and Associates.
Yes.
Yeah, I would watch the heck out of that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this show is going to end and Midge is going to be really successful. But hey, Susie's got other clients, so let's keep following Susie, because I'm there. Sign me up.
Further adventures of Susie and what houses she could burn down to get the insurance money.
Exactly. And I totally agree with Jen. Without Susie, there's no Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah. No, she would have been working in the department store pretty much for the rest of her life if it wasn't for Susie.
Yeah, she can spot talent, she can nurture it, she can manage it. She's proved herself every bit as much as Midge has.
Well, that's what she tried doing with the other client when she tried picking, Midge's biggest rival, tried stealing her away, and Susie would have made the play a success if, and Susie was pushing for it and pushing her, but she called, and she calls Midge on her BS too. Anytime she starts, going down a direction that is not proper or self-destructive, Susie will call her on it and say, you're being a real bitch right now, and you've got to stop this. And the person might not like hearing that, but it's the truth, because Susie will not BS anyone. She's pretty much a straight shooter, and that's part of her, part of her detriment in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's the mark of a really, not only a good business person, but a real friend. Only your real friends will look you in the eyes and tell you the truth. It takes bravery to do that.
Yes. Okay, well, we're about at the end of our time. I know. I can't believe it's already been an hour.
I told you this would fly by.
You were right. You were absolutely right.
So let's end on predictions for season 4.
Oh,
Mm.
well, little. I
Okay,
do know. I
I
don't
got-
know a secret for season 4 though.
Okay, I have not read any spoilers, but I did just rewatch the ending where Shy's manager looks right at Susie and says, "One day you will be in the same position I am in now." And I feel like if that line had been like in the middle of an episode in, like season 3, episode 4, I might have been like, oh, okay, whatever, it's a throwaway line. But it's like in the last couple minutes of the end of the season, like that's foreshadowing in neon lights. We're gonna see Susie be in that position. That's the first thing I think is like, that's something that we're gonna get to see the results of that and how that plays out.
That's a good way to do it. I'm probably thinking that this season is going to be the ramifications still of Midge being kicked off the tour and her having to pick up the pieces from that. I don't know what's going to happen. I couldn't have predicted last season, what was going to happen. I don't like doing that, and even in any of my shows that I, in my podcast, we try not to predict what the next season's going to be. But I will tell you this. I will tell you a little secret. My niece works on Broadway. She's a costume designer. And in the costume design, I guess they call it like a studio, and where they make all the costumes. One of their clients is Mrs. Maisel.
Ooh, nice.
And so she's been actually making the costumes for Mrs. Maisel season 4.
Oh,
and
that's exciting.
You're going to be in for a big treat. Let's just say that.
Oh,
You got to give us more. You can't leave us hanging, Mike. Come on, you got to give
Spoilers.
us more. We're not going to
can
tell anybody. It's
Nobody's
just
watching
us.
this anyway, so it's like,
we can edit it out later. Just tell us.
No, let's just say there's going to be some amazing dance routines this next season.
Okay, we'll look out for that then. I tried to get it out of him. He wouldn't budge.
No, I'm a steel trap. You can't beat me on that.
As for season 4, where we're going to go, I would really like to see the whole friendship growing between Midge and Joel, as not a romantic kind of relationship, but more of like, co-parenting. You be successful at that. You've got 2 kids together. You still need to have like this camaraderie ship and this little, kind of friendship to get along for, to raise your kids successfully. But I did see kind of a one person who was going to be in season 4, which I am super duper excited about. I don't know what her role is going to be, but I am just so ready to see this person in this particular show. I don't know if I need to say it or if Van was staying away from spoilers. You can say it and we can edit it out later.
I feel like if you say spoiler alert, then people can fast forward if they want to, but you can tell us.
No, I'll tell you once the camera stops.
Oh, that's so cruel. Okay.
Well,
you got to be cruel to be kind.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for joining me tonight to talk about this. And I am sure we will have so much more to talk about when season 4 comes out and in future years. Thanks so
Yay.
much. So, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. This was a
ton
wonderful
of
panel.
fun.
This was great.